When it comes to video podcasting setups, there is always a delicate balance between quality and complexity. Anytime you add video to a podcast, you are adding in kind of a lot of complexity. And I have done videos in the past where I've explored simplified podcast setups, like using just webcams to make that as not complex. I guess a simpler way to say that would be to make that as simple as possible. But today I want to change things up a little bit and try to go for as high quality as possible without getting into using something like this, which is my Sony FX3 and full-on, camera rig setup. So what I have is a multicam podcast setup based around primarily the YoloCam S7 and the YoloBox Extreme. And this video is sponsored by Yolo, which I'm very glad about because I really like these cameras and I wanted to explore them in a setup, and this makes that much easier to do. And what I mean by that is that the S7 is a webcam, but also not. It is a micro four thirds interchangeable lens USB webcam. So what that means is you have the image quality of a full-on mirrorless camera and you can swap out lenses to whatever you want, but there are no physical controls on the camera itself. You have USB for power, USB for data, and then HDMI output. So you can connect it to a computer or a YoloBox through USB or HDMI, or simultaneously you can use both, which is pretty cool. But there's nothing I can do on this camera to adjust any of the settings. And if you're a camera person like me, someone who likes buttons and likes the physicality and all that stuff, and you spend years learning it, that might seem a little confusing at first. But I had to remember, probably for the best, not everybody in the world is like me, and there are a lot of people who want the quality of a mirrorless camera, but they're not camera people, or they don't have the resources to manage and produce a podcast and take care of all the different camera settings. And so these types of webcams, basically a micro four thirds mirrorless webcam, is kind of perfect because you get the quality of a mirrorless camera without the complexity of a mirrorless camera. So to start off with, I have a typical 3-camera setup running into the YoloBox Extreme. I have 2 YoloCam S7s, one of them for each guest, because the guest camera is really where I want that shallow depth of field, and those cameras also have incredibly fast autofocus, so if the guest moves just like I'm moving right now on my Sony FX3, it can track me. And then I'm using the YoloCam S3 as my main master wide shot, and I've done a whole separate video on this camera. It's a $200 webcam that has really impressive image quality, and you'll kind of see how it mixes in with these cameras. I don't need the super shallow depth of field for that master shot, so I could use that for a guest camera, but just stylistically, I would prefer the look of the S7 in this case. But for the wide shot, where I'm seeing both guests and the whole setup, having a wider depth of field actually helps because then you see the whole setting, you see both people, everything stays in focus, and everything's clear and easy to see. The 2 S7s are running into the YoloBox Extreme via HDMI, and the S3 is running in through USB. And for audio, I had a lot of options, but I wanted to try to keep things as simple and relatively compact as possible. So with the YoloBox Extreme, you do have a 3.5mm input for any kind of microphone or interface or whatever if you want to send that way, but you can also use USB, so you can take something like a full-on Rodecaster, connect it through USB, and then have all of those resources as well. I took kind of a simpler middle ground and I actually just have the Rode Wireless Pro connected through USB, and then I have 2 of the Rode Interview Pro wireless microphones. And I've talked about these microphones in other videos before. I like them a lot for podcasts because they have no handling noise, they're not at all prone to plosives, and the fact that they're wireless means that I don't have to worry about running cables, so it's kind of a simpler setup to set up and get up and running quickly. They also have built-in 32-bit float recording, so if I wanted extra redundancy, I can record independently on each microphone just in case I need it, and then I have a backup of my recordings. So now that I've explained the setup, let's switch over and see what it actually looks like. So now you are looking at me on the YoloCam S3, and this is all being recorded in 4K to the YoloBox Extreme. I've talked about my extreme like of the YoloBox Extreme before because it is pretty much the only actual 4K video switcher out there. It has 8 HDMI inputs, plus you can use USB inputs, and 5 of the HDMIs can be 4K. But one thing I really like about the way that the YoloBox Extreme handles different workflows is that it lets you, as the user, decide how you want to push it and then what features you do or don't have access to. So for example, I just said that it has 8 HDMI inputs and 5 of those are 4K capable. So for example, if you wanted to do a multi-camera stream up to 4K 60, you can totally do that. But if you want to start adding in an advanced feature like isolated track recording, you can do that too with some limitations. So for ISO recording, for example, you can do 3 sources at 4K 30 while also recording those 3 sources in isolation for later, for editing. So that to me is perfect because you get to decide what you want your workflow to be. Do you want to have crazy advanced stuff happening like ISO recordings and streaming and recording simultaneously, and then you just have fewer inputs and you go 4K 30 instead of 4K 60? Do you want all 8 inputs and you just keep everything to 1080? Do you want 4K 60, but then you're just not able to do isolated recording? So all that to say, right now I'm recording at 4K 30 because I usually don't use 60 FPS for podcasts. And I am using a new feature on here, which now lets me record as an XML file. So I can take this and put it directly into Final Cut Pro for editing, and it just makes things a lot quicker. And you also do have the option to record either externally to an SSD, internally to an SD card, or internally to the YoloBox Extreme itself, which has over 200 gigabytes of internal storage that you can use as well. But as you're looking over here, my guest chair is empty. So you might have guessed it that they're not here yet. And actually, I don't have an in-person guest today, so we're gonna do something really fun in a second. But first, so this is actually one of my favorite tricks. If you take a small HDMI cable from the HDMI output of the YoloBox and then put it into one of the inputs, you now have the ability to just directly record the screen, and it works great instead of trying to rig a top-down camera or something along those lines. So before we jump into the podcast setup, there are a few things I wanna show you here. One, these are my audio controls. So you can see I have USB 2 is the active audio. That is where my Rode Wireless Pro is connected, and that's what I've got going on here. But if we look down at my inputs in the bottom left, you can then see the different cameras. Each of the camera inputs in the top right has this little icon right here, and if I click on that, we see we have a few more options. So I have flipping, chroma keying, all that kind of stuff. There's a new one in the bottom right, and that is LUT. And there's a LUT to love about LUTs because now you can import LUTs directly to the YoloBox Extreme. So in this case, my LUTs are more of a stylistic choice because all 3 of the YoloCams just straight out of the box match each other pretty well and work together pretty well. But if you're mixing and matching cameras, you're doing Canon and Sony, YoloCam and Sony, YoloCam and Obsbot, like you're mixing and matching different brands that process colors differently. Now from directly within the YoloBox, you have a way to create LUTs. And so what I did is I actually just took sample footage, adjusted it in DaVinci Resolve, and then from your color page, you can right click on the clip and then generate a LUT. And that's all you need to load into the SD card on the YoloBox. And then when you go to the LUT settings, you can then add a LUT and everything that you have will be available there, and you can add that to your available options. So I did one for each camera. You can kind of see here by the names, I have YoloCam S3, S7 number 1 and S7 number 2. So that way I have a separate LUT for each camera here. You can turn the LUT on or off, and then you can also adjust the intensity of it. Mine are they're definitely not professionally designed LUTs, so they're just kind of for my space and this setup over here, they work pretty well. But I love that in this case for just dialing in stylistic choices as I want. Since what I'm using right now is all based around what are essentially webcams, if I do want to have more fine controls over the colors of these cameras, I can then connect them to my computer, either a Mac or a PC, open the YoloLive Compose software, and then I have a lot of options for deep diving into white balance, exposure, focus, frame rate quality, all that kind of stuff. Any settings that you change on the cameras while they're connected to a computer will stick with the cameras. So then when you connect them through HDMI later on, those same settings will still be there. So normally this is where I would start my podcast episode, which is why I like this typical 3-camera setup. I would be sitting over here, introducing it on the main camera. I could then cut to the camera of me over here and then go back to the main camera. And then I could go over here and be the guest camera here. And then the plan is that the guests don't have to look at the camera because that's uncomfortable. As we would just be looking at each other and talking, the cameras would make that feel very natural. And then we go over here and we go back and forth. And the nice part about that, the even nicer part about that is we can use auto switching. So going back to the YoloBox over here, if I go into the switching options down here, now we have auto switching with video follows audio, where I can pair audio sources to video sources, and we can switch between those. But that is something that is difficult to do by yourself. So I'm gonna phone a friend for some help. So now I've switched things up a little bit. It might not look like it here, but if I switch over here, now I have sort of a different setup to do a remote podcast. Now, as long as I'm not in monitor mode, if I'm in the actual live streaming mode and I go into my settings, I do have the invite guest option down here. It's the icon with 2 people. And when I turn that on, then I can enable inviting guests and I can create a link to invite a guest. And when that guest shows up, you're able to use their audio source and their video source. So I have a few options. I have, of course, there's the guest camera, and then I have a split screen camera as well. And then I have, that's what I sort of did here, is I switched my cameras a little bit. So I have this shot, which is going to be my wide establishing shot for the podcast. If we go here, in my inputs down in the bottom left, you can see I have video 1. That's my podcast intro. So I can play that. It'll play the intro to my podcast. I can go here to this shot, and then I can introduce my guest. And then we can be split screen and we can talk and go back and forth. And a key to this is going to be auto switching so that while I'm hosting the podcast, I don't have to worry about constantly switching. So I'll show you how to set that up in just a second when I invite my guests so you can see it in real time. And then also I did switch my setup a little bit. So I only have these 2 cameras. I don't need the second in-person guest camera anymore. So I'm just using both of the S7s, and both of them do have the same lens. It has a Lumix 25mm f1.7 lens. And that might sound strange, f1.7, but micro four thirds is a little bit different than crop sensor or full frame that you might be used to. And I basically have one camera closer to me because these are just prime lenses, they don't zoom, and then another camera further away to kind of get the whole setup here. And I'm still using the same microphone, so that way it's just easy, wireless. I've got my setup here where I can switch things, and then eventually once auto switching is turned on, I won't have to touch this, and I've got my computer just for notes and stuff, so I remember what we're talking about, and I can actually host the show. I'll include a little snippet of the episode here, so that way you can see the example, and then the full episode will be online. With that said, I want to bring in my special guest. I do have headphones on so I can hear and monitor our conversation, and that is Bronson from Audio Hotline.
Hey, how's it going?
Cue applause sound effect. How do you know it's Bronson? Because I can go in the YoloBox and I can pop up graphics on screen. So you are hundreds of miles away from me right now, and we're going to record a podcast episode, a real podcast episode. I'll include a snippet in this video just for the sake of time, but then I'll put a full version out that's going to be available on the Enthusiasm Project podcast, wherever you get your podcast from, and also on YouTube. So that's what we're going to dive into. And thank you for helping me out with that, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
But before that, a big thing with this, what I want to do with this is I want to make sure as Bronson and I are talking, I don't have to think about anything else except our amazing conversation. So that means we're going to go in and set up auto switching. Well, actually, I've already set up auto switching, so I'm going to show you what I did. If I go to the auto switching tab, I have these settings right here. The first thing you need to do where it says choose audio source is you can select your audio sources, and that's everything that you want to include and match to a video signal. So in this case, I selected USB 2, which is my microphone, and I selected Bronson, which is it's labeled as the guest. When he came in as a guest, that's what it was labeled as. Then when I go back to this page, there are a few other settings to adjust. There's switch delay sensitivity. So I have that at a 9 out of 10, which means it's going to be pretty sensitive. When Bronson and I start talking, it'll switch. Minimum switch duration means the minimum amount of time it will go to an angle. So it's not going to like flash and strobe back and forth. In this case, I want to make sure it comes to each of us at least 2 seconds at a time. And then your threshold for decibels, it's essentially anything below this won't activate switching. So -45 is pretty low, but that's because if I'm talking and then Bronson starts talking and he maybe starts talking a little quieter or whatever, it's not going to ignore him. So those are the settings I'm going to do. And then here where it says condition and switching action, this is exactly what we want to set up. So here where it says USB 2, that's my microphone. I want to go to HDMI 5. That's my camera. And then Bronson, when it goes to him, I want it to go to him. That makes sense. And when it's both of us talking, I want this to go to a scene I made called 2 Views, which is this split screen scene that I have right here. So when it's both of us, you should see this. Yeah. When it's me, you should see me. And when it's Bronson, you should see Bronson. And the beauty of that is I shouldn't have to do any of that. But when I start the episode, I don't necessarily want auto switching because I'm going to have to do an intro and there's going to be a video title and all this stuff. So I'm actually going to keep this button up here that says start auto switch turned off until we're into the guest conversation portion of the podcast, and then I'm going to turn that switch on. And the last thing before we record is I do have my podcast intro up here as video 1. So I'm going to click on that. It's going to go to HDMI 4, which is this wide shot, and then I will bring in Bronson and we're going to go through it. So here we go. I'm going to play our intro. Hello and welcome. My name is Tom. This is the Enthusiasm Project Season 14, Episode 3. Could it be? Yes, indeed. Sorry. Today I have a different setup, and also I'm not going to be alone. I'm not going to be flying solo. I'm going to have a very special guest, and that's what we're going to jump into. So before we get started, let me introduce my guest, which is Bronson from the YouTube channel Audio Hotline.
Oh, by the way, I have the YoloBox S7 the webcam thing,
Oh yeah.
right?
I was using that earlier in this setup.
Yeah. No, dude, that is it is very good. Like, it is shockingly good, honestly. I was very surprised by it. And yeah, I don't know, man. It's like, I would say that you could absolutely start a channel with that.
Oh
easily.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a $200. It's not a PTZ, because I did a podcast setup video that was based around the OBSBot PTZ webcams, like running into Ecamm. So it's like, okay, you already got your computer. You can do similar things with OBS for free. So you just buy these webcams. You can get all 3 of them for, the cost of like one S7, and you have a really cool PTZ setup. It's going to follow you, but obviously the image quality of these is different. But the S3, it's not a PTZ cam, it's just a webcam. Actually, mine's right here. I was using it in this setup earlier as the master shot camera. It mixes with these cameras super well. It's mixed with my FX3 sometimes. I've used it as a top-down camera a ton in videos, and for sure you could start if you can film in a setting where you don't need to have an independent camera that's on a battery and a memory card. You could for sure start a channel with this $200 webcam, and it would look awesome. I thought it'd be really fun to do a podcast episode since we have it up, so I really appreciate you being here and doing that and taking time.
Of course, man. Anytime.
For your busy life. So with that being said, is there anything you'd like to share? You want people to go to check out YouTube or whatever?
No, I'm good.
You got a MySpace page you want to pimp out or anything along those?
Oh, dude. I honestly, I really am bummed that MySpace pages aren't up still.
Me too.
Me too. Because I would for real love to just go back and be like, what song was I into at that point in time? Because that was the best part, is just getting you were on online at 1 a.m. and then you just go to a page and it just starts blasting death metal, and you're like, oh, sorry, parents.
I remember putting in a new, you change your profile song and you're like, you sit there and you're like, yeah, people are gonna get this is how I feel right now.
Yeah, dude.
People
after a breakup, you're like, oh yeah,
someone's
I got the perfect song for this.
Yeah. I got the perfect Aquabat song for this situation. So, hope you have a safe, happy, healthy, fun rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. For me, one of the most exciting things about podcasting and the rise of video podcasting is the limitless number of ways that you can accomplish it. The different combinations of cameras and audio and equipment. You can use computers, you can use setups like this. There's kind of no limit, so you can find what suits your needs, your budget, your creativity, and your preferences, and you can make something that is uniquely yours. I think this is a good setup for maximizing quality without crossing over fully into the world of super complex podcast production. And I'd love to know if you've used a setup like this, or what you use that kind of works for your workflow that maybe I or other people haven't thought of, but could be a really fun thing to try.